Welcome to 5 Minute Friday. My name is Putnam. These videos on Fridays are something that's happening in the garden at that time and how we might handle it, or something that we're thinking about in the garden at that time. We sell a thing called the Weekly Garden Planner over on my website, and it is a, right now, mostly video-based teaching tool for things that you would do week by week on a yearly basis. And then I do also here on the main channel, we'll do one of these videos a week just talking about something that we have going on in our Raleigh, North Carolina garden at this time. These videos, I call them 5 Minute Fridays. They're somewhere between 5 minutes and 15 minutes, just depending on what we have going on, but it's a catchy name. So there you go. That's the reason it's called 5 Minute Fridays, just to have a catchy name. One thing that's happened here in the last couple of weeks is basically we had a fall that just wouldn't end. It stayed mild and stayed mild and stayed mild, and then it just dropped to 22 really, really quickly. 22 degrees isn't necessarily a temperature that would have hurt really anything in this garden had we stepped down in time. But we had nights in the 60s and nights in the 50s, you know, just throughout the entire fall, and things weren't asleep. And so now, we were over at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum the other day. They have a lot of newly planted things over there in one area of the garden, and I could see a lot of damage on them, on the foliage. I think it's mostly superficial, and we'll go through that in this video real quick. I'm just gonna jump around, show you some things that really went to sleep in kind of what I would call an ugly way. They didn't go to sleep by kind of stepping down, and I'll show you some things that just didn't struggle with it and why that might be. Our camellias is 30, it's actually 30 degrees as I'm shooting this, and the brown flowers here are actually frozen to the plant. Camellias are kind of amazing where they'll bloom this time of year, and the flowers, when it's milder, the flower buds that are on here just open up into beautiful flowers, and then when it gets super, super cold real quick, those open flowers get stung, but all of the buds that are remaining on it will continue to open. So these camellias have been in the ground long enough that 22 degrees wasn't going to hurt them. It just basically killed all the open flowers back. And then the flower buds that are remaining on them are hardy enough that they'll just open later. We're about to go into a period of 10 days or so where we're not going to be particularly cold at night. And so these will just come back into flower. So despite the fact that they look really rough, but having all these brown damaged open flowers, it hasn't hurt this plant in any way, shape, or form. I think you can see we got daffodils that are probably 10 inches up out of the ground already. It just stayed mild and stayed mild, and it's not unusual to have things like daffodils coming up this time of year, but generally they don't get that high up before the cold actually kicks in and keeps them a bit smaller. But we've got all kinds of bulbs coming up. You can see Holly is out here with me, but bulbs coming up everywhere. I can't do anything about it. What's going to end up happening is the top of the foliage on these is going to get damaged, and then they're going to come into bloom just like they would have at the normal time of year in February or March or whatever. But they're not going to look as good as they normally would have because they're going to have some damaged foliage on them. Just giving an example of what kind of year this has been. This is a flower. My evergreen Chinese dogwood was coming into flower as that 22 degrees was coming. This is normally flowers in May and June, really peaks kind of early June, actually, much later than our native dogwoods. But you can see it still has tons of flower buds on it that haven't expanded, haven't opened up. So it's going to come into flower at its normal time, but it was actually trying to open some flowers before that. One thing that's really kind of gone to sleep ugly, and I think we will lose some herbaceous perennials out here. I have a salvia here that's hardy, supposed to be hardy in my area, but what has happened is it was still up and blooming like crazy, right? But look down here at the bottom, it has cracked, and even this morning you can see a little bit of ice down in the stems on it. It's cracked right down at the base, and this is not the way you want your perennials going to sleep. This thing still had a lot of water inside of it, and that water expanded and it cracked basically busted out from the inside to the outside of that plant. Sometimes this will kill the plant, sometimes it won't. If If the roots are well established, it'll just sucker and come up from a different spot. But a lot of times this actually can kill the plants, especially if they're ones that are the first year in the ground and they're not quite as established. But we've had a lot of things kind of, perennials go to sleep this way, where they had the water down in the stems. The garden doesn't look as neat as it normally does. We've actually allowed our annuals and perennials to die back in the ground this year and kept them up, because some of my things like gomphrena over there has seed on it, and the birds are still on it every day. So we're just letting it stand for a little while. Things like these cone flowers that were out here by the road, the seeds have been picked off of them now, but we allow the seeds to be picked off of it. Some of these things have hollow stems that allow the insects to overwinter in. So this perennial, or native perennials that are in the garden, we'll just let stand like this. We'll get to cleaning some other stuff up pretty soon, but I did leave it longer this year, and the birds have been able to take advantage of that. So I just want to point out the American beautyberry that's directly in front of us, that's just stems now. It's just lost its leaves. It went to sleep just fine. You see there's no leaves on it. It actually did its normal behavior and went to sleep. The clethra that's next to it, no problem whatsoever, okay? It's because these are native plants. My redbud that's in between them, I don't know that you'll be able to really pick it out all that well. It's got a few leaves still on it up here, but this is a new dwarf redbud. But these are all three native plants, and I just want you to focus on the fact that these native plants, and I have a lot of non-natives in this garden. I have a lot of natives and non-natives, but the native plants really just didn't have any issue here. They're on the clock. You know, they're on the clock that exist here, where the days get shorter and the nights, you know, get a little bit cooler, and they go into their dormancy just like they normally would. They just don't. As I look around this garden, you know, none of my native shrubs or native perennials have had any issue really with this with this basically non-fall that we had. Basically, we had a continuation of summer, and then it got slightly cooler, but not cold enough to actually put things to sleep. And then it got slammed. Well, the native plants weren't fooled by that at all. And they're asleep and doing their normal behavior out here. Some of our native plants, like these blueberries or something like Itea, actually do hold some of their foliage later into the season. But that's normal. They've got their normal fall color or winter color going and doing exactly what they would do any other year. Real quick, I'll bounce around to some non-native deciduous shrubs, or shrubs that typically lose their leaves in the winter, go dormant in some way. Here's a butterfly bush. It's absolutely covered in new growth, because basically this plant, if it's warm outside, it's going to continue to grow. So I'll be surprised if there's not some cracking down at the bottom of a few of the butterfly bushes in the garden, just because they keep that water in the stems, just like those perennials out front. Here's a weigela, native to Southeast Asia. It's Weigela, Florida, which makes it seem like it's a native to Florida or something, but it's actually native to Asia. But you see how the leaves just got burned on it, right? They got burned off of it. This is a super cold hardy plant, so it's not going to have a problem. But just pointing out that, you know, normally it would have gone to sleep differently than it did if the temperatures had moderated down instead of getting slammed by it. Our non-native, you know, hydrangea macrophylla, which we see everywhere, our big leaf hydrangea. These are also native to Southeast Asia, and they just kept their leaves on right until it got slammed, which is, you know, just, you know, how that goes. I don't know if any of the flower buds, you know, it looks to me like the flower buds along the stem, you know, where the flowers are going to initiate from next year, looks like they're still sound. So I don't think there's necessarily any issue with it. But it just is interesting to me that how, you know, our native plants knew exactly how to shut down and not be fooled by this. Again, I love, you know, native and non-native plants, and I'm not like promoting an all native garden or anything like that in this video. I'm just pointing out that it's an obvious difference out here as I look to see, well, what got fooled and what didn't get fooled. My Vitex definitely got fooled. You can see here, this stem is completely covered in leaves, and it just got knocked back. It's, again, super cold hardy plant. I don't think it's going to have any issue. The stems are still pliable on it. It still moving around. But it is an interesting thing that it didn't, without a moderation in temperature, it just stayed. It still has flowers up on the top of it, where it was still, as of 3 weeks ago, still flowering before it got, really hit, really hit hard. Another Weigela here, just another example of the leaves are still on it, and they just got burned off of it rather than going through a process of actually going to sleep and losing them. This pomegranate, another example of that, just didn't read the signs, and I think it'll be fine. I may have to cut some of this one back just a bit later. Not really a whole lot you can do with any of this damage. It is what it is. I've got to just wait. I wouldn't cut any of this damage off of it because it is offering some protection to the rest of the plant. What might have helped some of the damage that I see in the garden, either cracking on the perennials or leaf damage that I'm gonna have on some of my leafy evergreen plants. I need to get the leaves out of these pittosporum, but they have been damaged a bit by that sudden drop in cold. What might have helped them though would have been some sort of just light frost protection blanket or covering over them, which would have allowed them to still be cold on those nights, but not quite as cold. So that may have allowed them to go to sleep in a better way. What I'm gonna show you though is this. I've got this big oak up here that just kind of dominates the space. You can see up above, and then some other things that put this area in the shade. They actually kind of keep this area a little bit cooler probably at times, but they also put a covering over top of it that doesn't allow as much frost to settle back here. So interestingly, camellia back here, open flowers, not as damaged. No foliage damage on that Alyssium. The flowers on this Mahonia have not been damaged, which they're incredible at blooming in the wintertime, but that sudden drop down to 22, I thought the open flowers would have gotten, at least the open flowers on it would have been damaged, and they weren't. My Farfugium, which had been knocked to the ground pretty much everywhere from that sudden cold, with this covering over the top of it, is not knocked back. It's curled up this morning because it's below freezing as I'm filming this. But camellia back here still has some open flowers on it that weren't damaged from that cold. But you can see I didn't cover anything back here, but it does have a natural covering over the top of it. And so nothing back here has any of the signs of the things that are more out in the open air. Of course, this hydrangea macrophylla did go to sleep in that kind of ugly way that the other one did, where it just still had it was fully leafed out and got kind of nuked overnight. Good girl. Perfect temperatures out here for holly this morning. Normally my videos I am trying to help with how to build a garden, how to design a garden, how to maintain a garden. In this particular case, there's just not a whole lot we can do about any of this. Once flowers are damaged from the cold, it's you can't really do anything about it. My perennials that have been cracked down at the bottom, I'll probably give them another week or so before I cut any of that stuff back. My salvias and things, my non-native perennials. The annuals, again, I still have birds out here in the afternoon picking some seed off of these. As soon as I see that bird activity gone, I'll pull the rest of this stuff. I'll pull the rest of this stuff out and get the ground covered. Any other damage that's on a shrub or a tree or a perennial or anything out here, it's just nothing I can do about it. I'm gonna leave that foliage in place to try to help protect them the rest of the plant during the rest of the winter time, and hope that things come back. Now that we've gotten dormant, most of any damage going forward is probably going to be minimal. If you've had something where you planted it this fall and then it got damaged by the sudden cold, that might be something I would cover a few times during the winter if we're gonna have some below average cold. So if, let's say you planted a loropetalum, some sort of leafy evergreen plant, it got stung from the cold, and now it has obvious damage on it. That might be something that if we were gonna come back and go below normal nighttime temperatures, that I've covered a few times the rest of the winter, just to kind of protect it from any additional damage that it might take during the winter. But it is dormant now, at least. 22 degrees here for us in Raleigh, 20 to 25 several nights in a row. Definitely got everything dormant. Unfortunately, some things we're trying to leaf out, for next year. Some things are trying to grow for the spring. Some things are blooming out of season. It was just so wacky. We went way too long. This is unfortunately something I've seen more and more over my 39 years in this business, is that falls now just don't have, frequently we just don't get frost early. North Carolina State Fair is in Raleigh like the 3rd week of October every year, and we used to traditionally get a frost during that week, and we just don't anymore. So the way things go to sleep now is very different than they used to be. It just stays warm, and then bam, let's just slam them with some cold all at once. So this isn't unusual, you know, that we would have some things that we're looking at in our gardens right now and thinking that, ooh, how bad is that damage? We just won't know until they wake up in the spring and get regrowing. But again, I wouldn't be cutting on any of that stuff. Let the foliage protect it. If you think it's going to take some ongoing damage the rest of the winter, you may want to throw some covers over a few things. You know, on those nights that it's below normal. So thank you guys so much for following along with the channel.